Good afternoon. When I was first approached about speaking in front of you today, it was suggested that maybe I could talk to you about my love of theater. Because as many of you out there know, I am passionate about theater. Not just theater for me, but for everybody in the community. However, because I'm passionate about theater, I am in the heart of musical season. And I just knew I wasn't going to have time to write something and prepare and practice and memorize. So instead, I'm going to share for you today a story that I've been working on for a very long time, but haven't had the courage to share until this moment. But know that everything you see in front of you today was made possible because I was a theater kid. The greatest moment of joy that I ever experienced in my life was when I was having a blood test. And this was just not your run-of-the-mill kind of blood test. This was the kind of blood test where 8 vials of blood were being drained from my body. The kind of blood test where the phlebotomist looked at the order and then looked back at me and said, "Wow, your doctor is thorough." I went in for this blood test in January of 2021, and you might remember that time as kind of a very lonely time for a lot of us. We were in the middle of a global pandemic. We were working alone, we were going to school alone. Even when we were gathered together, we were socially distanced. But for me, the pandemic was lonelier than it was for a lot of people. I woke up on the morning of April 13th, 2020 with this intense anxiety inside of me, like I had never felt before, but I chalked it up to the fact that I was remote teaching and my kids were remote learning and my husband was remote working, and it was just an anxious time. So I went about my daily routine and I started to brush my teeth, and as I did, the water trickled down the left side of my face, and I thought, that's kind of weird. But I kept going, and I started to get ready for my day of remote teaching. I poured a big cup of coffee, I took a big swig, and the coffee just poured out of the left side of my face. And still I thought, strange. But it wasn't until I went in to get my kids ready for their day of remote learning that I finally realized something was wrong. I started giving them directions, telling them to get ready for their day, and they just looked at me with these confused faces, and they said, "Mom, why are you speaking in gibberish?" My husband came into the room at that moment, and he said, "I think you need to go to urgent care." So he took me to urgent care, and he dropped me off alone, and I walked in alone and waited alone, and then it was time to see the nurse practitioner. She ran me through a series of tests that I didn't know at the time, but became very familiar with over the next few weeks and months. And she got to the last one, and she said, "Open your mouth as wide as you can and wiggle your tongue from side to side." I did what I thought were her instructions, but as soon as I started to wiggle my tongue back and forth, she said, "You're having a stroke. I'm calling 911. The paramedics arrived. I was loaded into the ambulance and taken to the hospital alone, though luckily COVID precautions would not be as strict as they were later on. And after winding his way through a tent of COVID triage patients in the parking lot, my husband was able to join my side. I went through additional testing, and the doctor pulled him aside, and she said, "Your wife is having a stroke. In fact, it's so massive, I'm surprised that she's awake right now. We're going to need to airlift her to another hospital for emergency surgery." Now, this is a true part of this story. It had literally been just 2 weeks before when, for some unknown reason, I had thought to myself, if there is one thing in this world that I never need to do, it's ride in a helicopter. But here I was on the roof of the hospital being loaded into a helicopter, getting ready to travel to the next hospital. Luckily, despite being in the middle of a massive stroke, I had the foresight of mind to think, I'm never going to do this again, and I looked out the window the entire flight. I arrived at the next hospital where I waited for surgery alone, and this time they wouldn't let my husband join me. He had to sit in a car in the parking lot. First, we had to wait for the COVID test to come back negative, which it did. I'm still not sure to this day what would have happened if it had been positive. And I went in for surgery where they removed the clot that was clogging up my brain. I was sent up to a room to recover alone. The only visitors that I had were when my kids came to visit the next day and stood in the parking lot across the street, and I waved at them from the window. And then I went home to recover, mostly alone. Friends sent food and cards through apps in the mail. The few that showed up just left it on the doorstep and waved at us through a window. I didn't see my own mom for several months until she felt safe enough to get on an airplane and travel from California to visit. I didn't even hug anyone outside of my own home for 3 months until finally my dad and I felt like we had been isolated and safe enough to embrace. On top of all of this, a few days after I got back from my stay in the hospital, I got a phone call from a different doctor. "We've noticed some unusual nodules on your thyroid," he said. "We're going to need to do some additional testing." Now, I don't know if you know what a thyroid is or does. I didn't. But it turns out it's this little butterfly-shaped organ in the middle of your throat, and it is super crucial to life. So I went through some additional testing, and it turned out that unrelated to my stroke, I had thyroid cancer. Now, the good news is, the doctor said, this is the best cancer to get, because all we're going to have to do is remove your thyroid, and you will be cancer-free. You're just going to have to take a pill every single day for the rest of your life in order to survive. So almost exactly 6 months to the day of my stroke, I got dropped off at the hospital alone. I walked in alone. I waited alone for the surgery and went home to recover alone. Needless to say, in January of 2021, I wasn't feeling very good. And so my doctor had ordered a blood test. And keep in mind, this was a blood test where they were going to drain 8 vials of blood from my body. And so I went into the hospital on that cold January morning, and I sat down with a receptionist, and we were filling out paperwork, and she said, "I used to be a nurse in Lake Forest." And she started recounting some funny anecdotes and stories that she had about her time there, including one that I still remember about Johnny Depp and a baby shower, and we were laughing and we were smiling, and I started to feel this warmth spreading through my body. Then I went up for a blood test. And remember, they were going to take 8 vials of blood from my body. It took a really long time. And so as I was sitting there, the phlebotomist and I started chatting, and it turned out that we had kids of similar ages, and we swapped stories about how hard it was to be a mother in the middle of a global pandemic. And as the blood was draining out of my body, that warmth was spreading everywhere. And I finally recognized what it was. It was joy. And from that moment on, my eyes were open to so much joy that is around us every single day. Sure, there's the usual things, a beautiful sunset, the sound of babies' laughter, but there's these weird things too. Like, did you know in the summer when you look out at a field of grass and it's all about the same height, but there's that one tuft that's just sticking up so much taller than the rest, that tuft has a name? It's called a tussock. And now whenever I see a tussock in the spring or the summer, I feel joy. Or the sound of the frogs as they start croaking in the marsh behind my house. Or the feeling of the sticky feet of the cicadas when they pop up every 17 years. Or when I look up at the sky and I see the moon and it's shaped perfectly like the smile of the Cheshire Cat looking down at me from the sky. Or that fall, when I was sitting in my son's 7th grade parents' night because we were finally starting to return to normal life. And as the teachers were droning on, I was looking around the room at my fellow parents and community members, and I thought, I am alive. And I am at parents' night. And this is joyful. Now, I'm supposed to be teaching you something here in this TED Talk, and I mentioned at the beginning that I am a theater artist. And so as an artist, please, whatever message you heard today, go out and take that with you. But if you're sitting there thinking, I don't really know what I was supposed to learn from this conversation, I'm going to give you this. If you're feeling sad, depressed, down, anxious, scared, angry at God or the world or whomever for giving you a trial or a burden that just seems unbearable, take a pause and look around you. Because I guarantee you can find those little moments of joy. The sparkle of the sun on a mid-March snow that looks like glitter, the sound of the crack of the baseball bat at 6 in the morning that lets you know the baseball season has arrived. Bright pink shoes that make both the wearer and the viewer feel a little bit more joyful. And if you're having trouble seeing that moment of joy around you, make a human connection, because that's where I discovered that there is so much joy in this world. Hug a family member, text a friend, bring donuts on a random Wednesday for your colleagues because that definitely spreads joy. Or smile, say hi, strike up a conversation with a stranger. Because if you do, I promise you will feel better. Because if I could feel the most joy I've ever felt in my life while having a blood test, you can find that joy too. Thank you.